The clock struck 10 as I arrived at the Thompsons' mansion. As a babysitter, I was used to dealing with difficult children, but the offer of generous pay for watching a girl for a few hours was too tempting to pass up. The house was imposing, with its dark stone facade and windows that seemed like watchful eyes in the night. Upon entering, I was greeted by Mrs. Thompson, an elegant woman with a chilling gaze that made me instantly uncomfortable. "Thank you for coming, Sarah. My daughter is in her room, upstairs. Her name is Emily. I hope you won't have any trouble with her," Mrs. Thompson said with a cold smile before disappearing into the darkness of the house. I climbed the stairs with hesitant steps, feeling that something was not right. Upon reaching the hallway, the lights flickered intermittently, plunging the place into ominous shadows. My heart raced as I approached Emily's room. Upon opening the door, a shiver ran down my spine. The room was illuminated by a dim light coming from a lamp on the nightstand. In the center of the room, Emily sat on her bed, staring at me with eyes that seemed to pierce my soul. "Hello, Emily. I'm Sarah, the babysitter who will be taking care of you tonight," I said, trying to sound friendly, although my voice trembled slightly. Emily didn't respond. She simply continued to stare at me with that unsettling gaze. I decided to leave her alone for a moment and check the rest of the room. Everything seemed normal, but a feeling of unease clung to me like a shadow. Hours passed, and Emily still hadn't said a word. I began to wonder if something was wrong with her or if she was just a shy child. I decided to try my luck with a game. "Would you like to play hide and seek, Emily?" I asked, trying to cheer her up. However, instead of responding, Emily simply stood up from the bed and walked out of the room without a word. I followed her with my gaze, feeling a knot in my stomach as she disappeared down the hallway. "Emily, where are you?" I called out, hoping to hear her childish laughter in response. But silence was the only thing that filled the dark hallway. I began to walk slowly, feeling like every shadow was watching me with hungry eyes. My hands trembled as I advanced, feeling like something was lurking in the darkness. Suddenly, I heard a whisper behind me. I turned sharply, but there was no one there. The whisper seemed to come from all around at once, as if the walls themselves were speaking. "Emily, this isn't funny. Where are you?" I called out, my voice trembling. But there was no response. Only the persistent whisper that seemed to envelop me in a cold, damp embrace. I decided to return to Emily's room, hoping to find her there and put an end to this nightmare. As I entered the room, my heart stopped. Emily stood in the center of the room, her eyes closed and her hands reaching toward the ceiling. Around her, shadows danced in the darkness, twisting and contorting in grotesque shapes. "Emily, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice barely a trembling whisper. But Emily didn't respond. Instead, the shadows began to close in, wrapping her in a dark and oppressive embrace. I felt paralyzed with fear, unable to look away as the shadows moved of their own accord. Suddenly, Emily opened her eyes. They were as black as night, without a trace of humanity in them. A scream escaped my throat as I recoiled, feeling like the world was crumbling around me. "Sarah, help!" Emily cried out with a voice that was not her own, filled with agony and desperation. Without thinking, I ran to her, trying to free her from the grasp of the shadows. But it was like fighting an invisible enemy. Every time it seemed like I was gaining ground, the shadows closed in tighter around her. "I can't let go of her," I screamed, feeling terror consume me from within. Suddenly, the lights flickered on, flooding the room with bright light. The shadows disappeared instantly, leaving Emily trembling on the floor. "What happened here?" Mrs. Thompson asked, appearing in the doorway with a look of concern on her face. I tried to explain what had just happened, but the words stuck in my throat. Mrs. Thompson looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and disdain before taking Emily out of the room. "It's best if you leave, Sarah. We no longer need your services," she said coldly before slamming the door shut. I stood in the hallway, trembling with fear and confusion. What had really happened that night? I would never know for sure, but one thing was certain: I would never again accept a babysitting job without thoroughly investigating my employers. And as I walked toward the exit, a sense of relief washed over me. Because although I couldn't explain what had happened that night, at least I was alive to tell the tale.